All right, guys, welcome back for another podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the 515 report, kind of how that integrates with traction and ultimately accountability within the team. So here we go.
Welcome to the PAWCast.
So 515s, I know I had made the joke the last couple of weeks that like I have no idea what they are.
Yeah.
I know roughly, the idea, but the inception of, or actually the introduction of this tool was brought to us from an outside source.
Yes.
And then you showed up, and it was one of those moments of it was a quick change because it was like sort of like a realized immediate need.
Yeah. It was very reactive. We try to be proactive, but it was reactive at that time.
But that kind of speaks to the culture that we have as just, I know we've talked about it a number of times where it's like, oh, we see it, let's just go.
Yeah.
Like, don't sit, don't wait, don't try and, funnel it through whatever channel is necessary. Like, hey, this is going to work, let's do it. Yeah. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today is the actual functionality of that tool, how it relates to some of the other stuff that we're doing and why it fits into all of those tools that already exist. It's just another minor addition to the suite.
Yeah, and I think it's, what I like about getting down into kind of this nitty gritty, of how, our education system is set up, between the skills rubric and so on and so forth. I think what I like is it's you really start to see this merging of concepts from all the other podcasts that we've been having. Mm-hmm. And, I think when we as a profession start to say, like I said, it's, 8 hours in a day to maintain, 10 hours a day to gain. And it's like, well, we don't have that as our base day is maybe 10, maybe 12 hours. So it's like, how do you actually get to the point that, hey, I've been listening to these podcasts. I want to actually do what they're doing, but how do I actually implement that within the team? Mm-hmm. And I think when we start to look at the 515 or the skills rubric, the interest list, our education system as a whole, first of all, you have to have culture and core values. Mm-hmm. You have to have the mindset of accountability. And we start to, of course, look at the accountability ladder. What we're talking about is level 8. We're talking about implementation. Mm-hmm. As we're going through these podcasts, is we're actually providing up to level 7. We're saying, here's the solutions to among the most common problems and biggest problems that we actually have in the profession. This is, like you said, it's a tool. It's an implementation tool. Yeah. However, if you don't have an accountable team, because 515 you can run individually, 515 you can run as a bigger picture, but by 515 as a bigger picture is traction, which we'll talk about in a minute. Mm-hmm. But if we're staying down in sort of this, denial category, or we have, people where you're trying to run through a skills rubric or 515, and it's just each week goals aren't met or accomplishments aren't, occurring, and we constantly see challenges, and then you start to get really what we say, it's unnecessary conflict, right? So you start to have unnecessary conflict about not getting tasks complete, where everyone's like, well, you're this and you and this. It really is a nice tool for 515 or for traction to basically just identify what are you actually doing. Mm-hmm. When can we actually realistically start to get this accomplished. Right. And I think that was truthfully for me, I think we made the joke, we made it a couple of times. We made it last week about how for me, when it's like, well, where are we going to start? I'm like, we're just going to do everything. Mm-hmm. That was yes, I had to leave the room during our first planning meeting. Coming back to it though, I think for me it was actually probably some of that I don't want to say anger, frustration, came from you just don't know where to start. Yeah. And I think for us, really before we get into 515, it probably behooves us to at least touch on traction first. Mm-hmm. Traction, again, you can do large picture, small picture, in that capacity. But I think for us, the traction model, it was a little difficult to get our mind wrapped around in the beginning, but it's a really, really powerful tool.
Well, I think the reason that it worked so well once the switch was flipped is the fact that essentially what the traction model is, and I put the link to the book in almost every video that we've had.
Oh, sure. Nice.
And I will continue to do so, is that what it does is it takes the big things and it it forces you to boil them down or parcel them out into consumable items within roughly a 2-week time frame. What can you do right now to take a step forward, get traction, start to actually grab on and move the wheels? I think the reason that works, though, is because when you get to the point of actually having consumable items, having run a triage-based clinic allows you have the skill set more innately to prioritize those items.
Gotcha.
Because if something else comes in, and you just know that it's higher priority, you might not be able to communicate it great yet.
Yep.
And it might not be super well. And that was kind of what the initial onset of that tool was like, well, Carlo, you've been sitting on these caregiver resources for 6 months. What's happening? You said you were going to have these done by the 4th of July, and then they get done on January 1st. Right. But it's like, well, they got done because what ended up happening for you was there was just something ended up on top of it in terms of prioritization, which is what the tool is made for.
Yes.
That's what the 515 is made for, is what's highest priority right now, and how are we going to get these things done efficiently, as well as avoid unnecessary conflict. Right?
Yeah,
It's a direct retort to the idea of inefficient process and unnecessary conflict.
Yes, those two things. Yeah, it's an like you said, it's an implementation tool that helps with the inefficient process. Yeah. But what I will say is, like you said, once the switch was flipped, it wasn't exactly just like you run in a room and flick it. It was like no.
It probably took
I would like to say 6 sessions, and I think we were meeting every other week. I mean, it
may have been longer than that.
Yeah, I mean, because that would put us out at like 3 months, 4 months, somewhere in that category. Yeah. I remember it was kind of a real big struggle bus in the beginning. And I think part of it is trying to find the groove of technology that works. I think originally when we were doing traction, we were doing it pretty much paper-based, which I think is a good way to teach it in the beginning.
Yeah. Yep. I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah.
And like actually writing out and fulfilling your process on paper.
Yes.
Because if you've ever read or heard of the book Good to Great, it's 6 rules.
I've heard of it, yeah.
It's written by Jim Collins. Rule 6 in that book out of 6 is that technology is not a solution. It is merely an accelerator.
Yes, correct.
So like get away from technology, develop your solution, and then find the thing that does it faster.
Funny. That's actually really funny, because that's exactly what I was thinking with the 515s.
Yeah.
Is let's knock these things out on paper, because I mean, mirroring what we had done. So just doing it on paper initially, then we can roll it over to Microsoft Teams. And I think that for us, which again, I mean, we haven't really talked about traction on 515s yet. However, the integration of technology, I think the Microsoft 360 or 365? 365. That software has been incredibly useful between Teams and Planner. But, I mean, Outlook has a planner in it. Even Apple software has, planning. I mean, there's reminder system and so on and so forth. So again, like you said, technology is an accelerator, but I think as far as the multi-individual, multi-team coordination, I don't think that there is better software on the market than the Microsoft Teams.
There's unfortunately not.
No. For all the parts, communication, file transfer, file allocation, task allocation. I mean, it's
I cannot tell you how many hours I put into researching an actual technology solution that would facilitate this process. And the Teams process isn't perfect, but it's closest.
Yeah.
Which is funny because Traction actually has a technology solution.
I remember you saying that.
But it is basically their paper materials digitally. Yes. So you can have the conversation digitally. However, it's not really user friendly all that much. But either way, the process itself doesn't really change. But that was a big barrier, because it was like you especially wanted to move really fast.
Yes.
Because you had the industry overview done.
Yep.
And obviously it was a working thing, and it's different now than it was then. Yep. However, it was like, here's all this stuff.
Yep.
I need to go. Like, where are we going? What's happening right now, and how are we going to communicate that information to upwards of 30 people all at the same time, or whatever it might be?
Yeah.
And the hardest and most frustrating part of that conversation was saying, well, actually slow down.
Yeah.
you need to get this process in place. You need to be able to speak this language and understand what you're actually doing in terms of prioritization. Not that I don't trust you to be able to do it, but you just doing it is different than you understanding it so you can teach it.
Yes.
So
that was delegation was a big part of that,
right?
too.
And
those two things ran together.
Exactly.
Yeah, speaking the language, being able to delegate, and knowing that if someone was a little bit slower at it than what not necessarily slower than what I could do it, but slower than what I was hoping it would be done from a time frame standpoint, it was still getting done by someone else, and it was still getting done with a high quality product.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's really what that process from the traction model and the big scope. So the difference between the traction model that we use and then the 515 is the functionality of the process is pretty much the same.
Pretty much.
It's the scale in which you implement it. So the 515 is really on an individual level, but the reason that we roll it back into the traction model is because we've used that on a leadership team level for years because it allows for a wider scope of things that are happening, and you can use it more on the easiest way to put it is a departmental level or above. It does work on an individual level, but sometimes it actually gets too wide for one person, which is where the 515 comes into play. But really that whole thing is about three things. It's set your initiatives for what you want to do for the year.
For traction.
Yep. Set your priorities, your quarter priorities. So what am I looking at in terms initiatives, issues, what's standing in my way of fulfilling those initiatives, and then of those two items, what is my quarter priorities? How am I going to, what is the most important thing for me to solve so I can fulfill these initiatives? If it's simply focusing on the initiatives because none of the issues are insurmountable, then you just focus on those. But if you have an issue that's simply in your way, i.e. my culture kind of sucks, like I need to work on that, right? Like that's going to be a big barrier to fulfilling an initiative. So it's just about being critical of knowing everything that's in front of you and putting the most important thing on top and then consuming it bit by bit. Yeah.
And that's where I think when we started doing it initially, meeting on the consultation side, that was almost exactly it. We were trying to focus on ways in which we could manage core values, culture, the performance system, education system. I mean, and even now, a couple years later, I mean, we're still doing that actively. It's a lot more streamlined now. But, for us, because we had so many different things that we were doing at one time, most of our meetings only focused on culture, core values, and education. And behind the scenes, I was still doing process. I was still fixing inventory. I was still fixing, some of these other more mechanical parts, the software, all these are kind of happening, which I never actually brought to the table as far as priority, but it's like it needed to get done. And it did come up each week or whatever it was, every couple of weeks in the challenges, at least in issues. And I think, like you had said, there's issues, initiatives, and priorities, and that's from really, really big picture coming down to small. So, like you said, the issues, the issues honestly was our entire industry overview. It was that central portion. But even within the three culture, service, and talent as our issues, it also then bled into the blue parts of the diagram as well. Between the mentorship, or now what we're calling our education system, the core values. It was like, how do we actually institute like our mindset of serve the patient, so even then, I think our issues list, while there's kind of 9 main issues we have between culture, service, and talent on the industry overview, I think our issues list was like 35 things long.
Oh, it was more than that.
It was just
because you had an existing one and then you showed up with this, and I was like, oh, so these are actually all substantially bigger than this.
So put as much as you want on your issues list. It doesn't matter, individually or get the team together. And again, we're talking more about traction. We're not talking about the 515 yet. But the issues list is, honest to God, as big as you want it to be and as much as you can identify. And that's actually part of why when we as an organization, PAW Health, we start to talk about the future of PAW Health the future of PAW Health is protecting the solo practitioner. It's really what it boils down to, is not allowing our profession as a whole to move 100% corporate. It's saying, no, we want local ownership. We want individual influence. It's because of the issues list. You can't realistically have multi-state ownership in any way, shape, or form with the expectation that you're going to have pure local influence.
Right.
Because if you constantly have to look up the ladder or up the food chain to try to solve a local solution, you're going to be met with unnecessary conflict and inefficient process. So really to say, again, while yes, the issues list is the issues list, it's more important that these issues are specific to each clinic. We want to maintain individuality. We want people to be themselves. And sometimes that individuality is an issue for which there is a solution, whether we talk about alignment to a common purpose, like serve the patient, that individual problem as we move towards more education on core values, or it's more tactile into what is your actual job. So again, from a traction model standpoint, with the first big checkoff item as being your issues list, that's what keeps us focused locally.
Absolutely. And so the idea of having a large structure to provide you your issues list, like, hey, here's the things that you're trying to solve. It's not only inefficient, but and creates conflict. It's also likely like just flat out inaccurate with what you're going to see on a day-to-day basis. Because, I mean, for an example, on that front, if you were to walk into a clinic and say, here's all these big cultural problems that you're going to fix in your clinic that's seeing 8 to 12 patients a day in Iowa.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
Like that's nowhere on my scope, nowhere near my radar. Like I'm just trying to make payroll.
Right.
And then on the flip side, if you were to bring that to a large corporate structure and you had the small practice problem, like what?
Yeah. Why are you talking to me about this?
Yeah, I don't care. Like, shoo, please go away. Like, I have bigger fish to fry, whatever they may be.
You're right.
So having that basically and that was the big conversation, and really, I think a good transition point into the 515 is when you had brought the industry overview to that meeting, and it was, okay, Carlo, what is actually within your scope of influence?
Correct. Yes.
Right.
PAW problem, industry problem.
Exactly. Yep. So we started to segment out, what is an industry problem? Not to say that we don't have potential solutions on a local level.
Correct.
However, it's like, what is like right now, like what's really in front of us within your scope of influence?
Yep.
And then how do we get that in place so you can just continue to expand that scope? That's when we talk about clinic to jurisdiction to
community
state,
to state,
right.
Industry. Yep.
You just continue to grow that scope because that's the idea of, well, number one, like make sure that you don't overgrow yourself, because otherwise you're going to get stretched way too thin.
Yeah.
But also when you naturally expand your scope of influence in that way, as it grows bigger, it actually happens more efficiently because those that you are now trying to influence see the change that you've already made.
Correct.
It's genuine. It's proven. It's it's the clean your room.
Yes.
Like I have my shit in order, and I'm continuing. Like it's not perfect. It's a continuous process.
Yeah.
However, I have done my due diligence in proving to you why I know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And now I believe this is how you can do it on this level.
Yeah, take one circle bigger.
Right.
Yep.
So the idea of that then, if you work backwards, is, okay, now I have a staff person that, whether they're most of the time on the floor or off the floor in more of an administrative type role, it's like, okay, what is that person's scope of influence in this structure, or any, like really anything that's related to the company and like what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And then how do I put a tool in front of them so that they can start to expand out even further, right?
Yep.
And that's what the 515 does.
Yeah, absolutely. Because once you take that issues list and you, like you said, what is the most important right now? Is this a my clinic problem? Is this an industry problem? Or is it an industry problem that is actually affecting my clinic? So you kind of look at saying, well, I can't necessarily fix the industry on that level yet. And that's, of course, where we're moving is more industrial solutions. But, to then say that's where we pull down from the issues list to come into initiatives and saying, all right, let's think big as best as we can in this year. What can we, or what do we actually want to accomplish in the year? And I think that's where, like you said, then you start to identify either in clinic or out of clinic individuals as administrators or leads or whatever happens to be, to help with sort of those 1 year initiatives, because then you boil it down into the quarter, and that's what your priority. So for me, it's issue, 1 year, quarter, and then it's issue, initiative, priority, as far as the traction model. But for me, that's then you break it down further into saying, okay, in the year, this is what we want to do. 2019 is our education year, and I think we're wrapping it out really strong, to be honest. But anyway, that was our 1 year initiative. Was we have a lot of problems with continuity and efficiency and so on and so forth. So that this whole year we dedicated to as many structures as we could to sort of fix the education system, and then coming into that quarter priority to then say, well, here's what we're going to do for quarter 1, 2, 3, 4, and then again coming back to the accountability component of that in your sort of quarter priorities is saying, okay, well, if we can then say, we're going to take these 3 issues we're going to tackle this year. These 3 issues are going to move into probably twice as many initiatives, so it's going to be, you're going to expand that out, and that's going to be twice as many priorities for the quarters, where it just keeps, exponentially increasing to then into your to-dos. And that's when you start to say, what am I going to do in this week? What am I going to do in the next 2 weeks? Because I need to serve my quarter priority. I need to serve my 1 year initiative, and I need to get this issue off the table.
Right.
And like you had said, that's then when you identify these individuals to help with some of these base administrative things. While yes, you can use a 515 to help a staff member get through a skills rubric, that's completely acceptable. The tool that we have for as the 515 report essentially just mimics that sort of process.
Right.
But in saying in this week, and now getting into the actual 515 component, it's now helping the individual, helping the administrator, or staff member actually say, what did you do last week, and what do you want to get done this week? And if you had something from last week you didn't do, and it's bleeding over into this week, why?
Right.
That's essentially it.
And that's so that conversation is like factually identical to the traction conversation.
It's just sometimes tough to stomach.
Yes, that's the biggest. That tends to be the biggest barrier to the fulfillment of this process. Is you go to have that conversation of what did we get done. Right, that part's easy. Like, we got this to do to that.
Check
blah, blah,
mark.
blah. Like, yay me,
Fantastic.
right?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't get this one done. I'm gonna either make an excuse or blame somebody else or wait or just deny that it's a problem at all, right? Like, this wasn't that big of a deal, whatever.
Right.
The unaccountable behavior comes out in that front, and that's where, this tool really helps shine a light on that if that's a problem.
Yes. Yeah, which again integrates into what is our education system. This is an education tool. This is an implementation tool. And what it allows, Dr. Hilda Mahia Abreu, who introduced me to this from Michigan State, she said it's a metric. It's a metric in order to be able to monitor your staff, to monitor your administrators, to monitor your team members, people with whom you're working, to monitor what they're doing. It's a metric. But when you come back to ultimately, like you said, the performance growth plan, if we sort of have shaky criteria on which we have established a growth plan where it's like, I think this has been a problem, and you say, well, I know that in the last year I may not have the best of examples on why this is an issue, I just think that it is, or I feel that it is. Instituting a 515 then says, all right, well, let's just sort of blank slate it. We know there may be an issue in these categories, and let's just work that out into the weeks and months to follow. And then you have actual week to week progress on saying, well, I thought this was a problem, maybe it was a legitimate problem that then didn't become a problem because every single week you're talking about it constantly. And when you start to look at the 515 report, there's so the idea is, I had it flipped in our other podcast, so it's 15 minutes to write, and it's 5 minutes to review, and then 15 minutes to discuss, if necessary, of course. And the idea is that your 515s are run at the beginning of each week. So it's kind of your Monday priority. For us, we have a 7-day work week. So for us, it's a Sunday priority. But with that, anyway, it's the beginning of your week when we run out of 515. But there's 4 big categories to a 515. Now, again, I think there's probably some variability in this depending, because there are resources online if you look up 515 reports. But the way that we use the tool is there's 4 big categories. There's accomplishments, there's targeted plan, there's challenges, and then there's connections. So again, accomplishments, targeted plan, challenges, and connections. So when we look at accomplishments, that's perfect. That's all formal and informal tasks that we've completed. The targeted plan is goals or pending tasks. Challenges are going to be obstacles for your goals or tasks, and then connections is going to be new contacts necessary for the goals or tasks.
Right.
So the idea is that at the beginning of each week, you basically pull up your old 515. What did I get done? And if it turns out that something happened in the fly where it was like, well, last week I was only planning on doing this, but this problem came up that I had to address ahead of time. It took priority over something else. So in that scenario where like Sunday, you laid out your whole week, this is my work week. This is what I'm doing this week. And then it's like, oh, this problem came up. I was issued another task because it was a reactive process. And we say, okay, well, you definitely made an accomplishment. You definitely got this new priority completed. It wasn't in your original targeted plan, but why did this even come into your world? Why did this become a priority? So if we say something made you break your plan, it can still be an accomplishment. You still got something done, right? I mean, that's fantastic. Huge thumbs up, because again, these are formal and informal tasks completed. But the reality is, what happened that led to this not being planned? Was there some other staff member who really doesn't have their shit together that then just threw it off on top of you? Can you help me with this?
Right.
By all means, if you have the opportunity to help someone, we are a team, but that's what this allows. It's like, well, if we start to see a trend behavior, because again, when we talk about we have the unaccountability ladder, but when we start to talk about assigning accountability, are you starting to become the rescuer for this other employee? This other employee doesn't have or isn't getting their tasks done and it's falling over. Now, again, that's okay. We can all ask for help. It just means that when we start to assign tasks and we start to look at targeted plans, it may mean that whatever the responsibility this individual has, that responsibility may not be their responsibility anymore. It was kind of like when, again, now this is taking a step out of the 515 and jumping into traction. When we were doing original planning for PAW, it was the jump out to the big picture and saying these caregiver resources. It was like we had 6 months turned into, or it was like a couple months turned into 6 months turned into a year, and it was the constant question of, Carlo, who can help you? And that's coming down into the connections part. If we were going to use the 515, it was like, who can we use to help you with this problem? Who can we assign this task to so that you don't continue to fail? And that's, I think, the big part here is we're looking at accomplishments and success. We're looking at identifying opportunities for growth. We're looking at opportunity to have accomplishments. So with that, if someone loses a responsibility and saying, well, you're not going to have this task anymore, it may mean that, well, we actually, administratively, we need you to focus over here. Because big picture, we've identified we actually need more help over there, and your skill set allows us to do more work efficiently over there. However, if it's like, well, this particular task, we aren't getting a lot of to-dos over to our to-done category that we so jokingly call it, it may end up being, well, if other people are taking on that task, you know what? It's no big deal because we still need that to get done. We're just going to have someone else do it.
Right.
And that's where we start to look at saying how we utilize the accomplishments portion, which is the first part of the 515, just that weekly review of what did you actually do last week? And was this a part of your original targeted plan? And it's okay if the answer is no, it wasn't part of my original targeted plan. And yes, it was a part of my original targeted plan. But if we start to see where more of your accomplishments are off plan, it means that administratively, bigger picture, we probably have to look somewhere else and saying, does this person need more direction? So it's kind of that sort of interpersonnel type meshing of to-dos.
That concept of assigning accountability, though, within that process is that's an art form, to be perfectly honest, because It's not. There's not a yes. There's not a no answer. It's kind of what you're referring to is the fact that like yes, is it in some instances is it okay for you to reprioritize in the moment to make a decision because this has to happen? Yes, absolutely. On the flip side of that, and you had mentioned it, like, are you being a rescuer?
Yes.
Right. So what potentially and most likely, like the reprioritization as compared to the original plan would in fact be less efficient because where are we headed? And now we had something coming our way.
Yes.
In essence, it is less efficient. Not to say that that's a problem. Again, if it's an issue that has to get solved, just solve it and get it out of your way so you can continue forward.
Right.
However, if you're rescuing, that's a barrier that's likely to keep getting in your way.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So the reason that the weekly check on this process is so critical is because if that behavior exists, you need to there is accountability on both sides of that, of the individual that is creating the need to be rescued as well.
Yes.
So then you go to the other side of that, and then you say, all right, this is what's happening. I understand that you needed help on this front.
Yeah.
And
which is fine.
Right.
However,
how do we implement a solution so that this doesn't get in this person's way because it's making them less efficient?
Yes.
You have to be able to have that conversation on that side as well.
Yeah. And that's where with that may generate another issue.
Right.
And that issue goes on to then your issues list. And that then says, hey, we as a company thought that this year, this is what our initiative was based on the issues we thought we had. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think what I really like about the 515s and really back to what we say on a clinic culture side of in the moment accountability. Mm-hmm. This is, again, it's a metric, but it's a way of establishing in the moment accountability on essentially task prioritization on pushing the company forward, pushing progress forward. And that's where I think then with this kind of being essentially a two-way street where it's like administratively, we have to accept that we may have thought that the business, while we're all going in the same direction, it's kind of what we say before is you write your plans in sand and your goals in stone, is that this might actually say, well, our plan is going to have to change. Our goal is the same. We know where we want to go. 2019, we want to make our education year. That is our goal for the year. Mm-hmm. It's just our plan to get there is probably going to shift, to this priority. Because again, initiative to priority is a quarterly issue. And that's where, again, just looking at accomplishments, just saying, what did you actually get done last week is such a powerful tool in the moment. Because it's like, not just saying, what are you working on? And I want to make sure that you're doing your job for what I'm paying you for. It has nothing to do with that. Yeah. It's what are you actually doing, and is it appropriate? Appropriate for your position, appropriate for efficiency, appropriate for accountability.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that review out of the four pieces, again, is likely the most powerful of the four that are within this. The reason that I do want to take a quick aside on this, though, is because with all of the stuff that we talked about within culture and core values, it was from a receiver's perspective outside of our world, it was probably like, that all sounds great. How the hell do I do that? Right.
Yes, yeah.
Like, I want to implement all of these things. And like, even if we take section 1.2 and it's like, I want to do all of this.
Yeah.
How do I do this?
Yes.
Right. Like this is on a one-to-one level with an individual, a way to give it a shot in a safe manner.
Yes.
So what did you get done this week? Like, how is that information received? How does that conversation happen? Have you identified you have an individual that now is willing to live within the purpose of the company and within the core values? Or do you have bigger cultural issues with that person?
Yeah.
Right? So where are your priorities with that individual? This is a way to generate the conversation of, and then ultimately identify where does your culture stand.
Yeah.
Because when you know where it stands, then you can start to develop solutions on a company-wide level, but also on an individual level, and then get back to this.
Yes.
You're identifying your potential issues as it relates culturally so that you can ultimately get to the point of a 515 and attraction model being really, really effective, because what you start doing is knocking out of the way your inefficient process of crap culture.
Yes.
So it is kind of a there's a swim back and forth on this where you're constantly going like, what is highest priority? What do I got to fix here? What do I got to fix here? You can't really put one in front of the other. They do pretty much happen simultaneously. Yeah. And I just wanted to bring that up because we are not one A, 2, I, B type thinkers.
Yes.
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for us.
Yeah.
And this process happened naturally for us because of the way that we tend to think.
Correct.
Which also then created, conflict at a lower level because
Correct.
people who tended to be more practically thinking
Yes.
had a hard time implementing processes like this because it was like, yeah, it's all sounds great, but how do I do that?
Yeah.
And that understanding the balance between the two pieces, I think, is a major key to success and not really sitting comfortably. And that's something that we've referred to a number of times.
Yeah.
Just don't try to get comfortable. Like,
Right.
understand that this is going to be a back and forth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the accomplishments, again, is a means to create the conversation of accountability and then identifying where you, as well as the individuals as you're having this conversation with, stand on those types of conversations.
Yep, absolutely. And that's where then if you start, again, we have certain accomplishments occurring that are either within our targeted plan or outside of our targeted plan. That's where we can sort of come into then what is the targeted plan,
Right.
Is that, and again, I think there's, like you said, there's kind of that fluid nature to it. And again, obviously we can get the 515, just the thing up online. That's no problem. But when you look at it for accomplishments, targeted plan, challenges, and connections, this is not necessarily a linear way in which you talk about these 4 categories, because as you start to say, all right, well, here's what I accomplished, but in doing so, we identified 3 additional challenges. The challenges section, I'm going to kind of go a little bit technically out of order here from accomplishments to targeted plan to challenges to jump into challenges. Challenges are, like I said, obstacles for your goals or your tasks. Now, those challenges in one category can be actual just problems within the task list. It's just, I have to get these tasks done, but they're hard. And why are they hard? Here's the challenges on why they're hard. That's 1. 2 is, the other challenges I have is that I'm continuing to rescue so-and-so, or
Right.
I'm continuing to have this administrator continue to hand me new tasks each week. And it's interfering with what my actual targeted plan is. And like you said, you have kind of this meshing of sides, because we have to remember that the 515 is a very intimate week-to-week tool, and that if we start to have where administration or kind of who's pushing the company forward, if we essentially have said, I need you to work over here on task A, but they just keep giving you to do items from task B,
Right.
then scratch the whole targeted plan.
Right.
If all you're going to tell me to just, you want me to do B, but you keep handing me everything from A, then let's just focus on knocking out A.
Right.
So that's, again, we look at the challenges. Sometimes it's just actual challenges within the list. Sometimes it's not. But to go from accomplishments into the targeted plan, again, the targeted plan is just, what are we going to do this week? And I think when we, again, take a step back from the traction model to say, what is our issues, to our 1-year priorities, to our quarter priorities, and now we're going to start to move into the actual to-do items in order to accomplish our quarter priorities. That's basically what your targeted plan is.
Right.
So, the targeted plan, I'm just going to use our clerk of accounts receivable targeted plan as our example. These can be very big category. So the idea is that within the targeted plan, we're going to have a list of things numbered 1 through 30. It doesn't matter. It's just that our plan is that we need to get these 30 things done, these 6 things done. But to say, one of the targeted plan for this week is that we need macro texts set up, or at least drafts set up for our accounts receivable, which is going to go into our new communications guide. That's big picture. That is a target that are an A plan.
Yep.
So how do we then break that down into consumable steps? So we're saying we're going from the issue down to the 1 year, down to the 3 month, and now we're going down into, I really need this set up in the next blank. I need this set up in the next 7 days. I need this thing set up in the next 4 weeks,
Right.
Because again, we don't want to have this targeted plan blow past a quarter priority, because then it becomes an initiative. This is, again, you have to look at the big picture in order to focus it down into a 515, and that focusing down is not necessarily, it can be, but it's not necessarily the job of an administrator who is taking direction. If you are an administrator giving direction, then by all means, yes, you should be driving the targeted plan. And then it's kind of a conversation between the two, the person giving direction, the person taking direction, to then itemize these things out. This is what needs to get done in the next week. This is what needs to get done in the next 3 days. And then what you do then from an administration standpoint, who is giving direction, you basically readjust that order. Mm-hmm. And saying, yeah, I understand that, one of the priorities on this targeted plan is to file small claims cases. It's like, well, I really need to have those macro texts done before we do our small claims, because if we then start to have our small claims individuals communicate back, we have macro text in place that then we can file into the medical record. So you can't do one without the other.
Right.
So it's like, even though, yes, the small claims process is lengthy and it's going to take, however many months to get your court date and communications and so on and so forth, you can run those two things in tandem, where it's like, well, why don't you go ahead and file your small claims and then rush to get that macro text done while your small claims are pending. It's like, no, if we have now saying, well, we can file the small claims, but I'm guaranteeing that I'm going to get those macro texts done in the next 3 days. Oh, well, yeah, screw it. Fine. That's fine. But the idea is that the administrator giving direction can help set the individual week-to-week priority in it from a big picture standpoint. Mm-hmm. And I think that's then when that's just on a big level, a 1 through 6, a 1 through 20, whatever happens to be. And then we then break that down into the next level. Mm-hmm. So this is then where we get into the practical thinkers versus the systems thinkers. Mm-hmm. The system thinkers are going to say, I can take the targeted plan of 1 through 6, and I'm just going to knock this thing out. The to-dos on a practical thinker is then to say, okay, well, I'm going to take, the accounts receivable macro text guide. Well, the first sub priority to that is, well, we need to have a meeting to figure out what actually this communication guide is. Mm-hmm. And then from that meeting, you may come out with 5 other to-dos. So the idea is that this continues to break down layer to layer to layer to layer, where you can then, like we had said before, the practical thinkers are going to be not just number 1, but what is 1A, mm-hmm. and then does 1A split into 3 items, 1B split into 3 items, 1C. So you can track all of that in the actual targeted plan. Mm-hmm. It's not necessary to keep this as just a big, broad topic bullet point. It's okay for a 515 report to be 8 pages long. Mm-hmm. And the idea being that we start to shift out these priorities, but we even start to shift them out within the subcategories. Mm-hmm. So it then breaks it down to not what are we going to do in the next quarter, but the month to the week to the day to the hour. Mm-hmm. So we basically just keep breaking down. And I think as we start to have those deliberate conversations on that targeted plan, that's where, like I said, you start to break out challenges. Right. You start to say, all right, well, so number 1 is we have to get this macro text draft for our communication guide. Well, we need to set an appointment between Ben, Carlo, and Rachel, who's in charge of the accounts receivable. Mm-hmm. Well, when is that meeting going to happen? Because that's a significant challenge to try to nail Carlo down for 90 minutes, which actually then in of itself coincidentally coincided with us recording the 515 PAWCast, right? Because that was then also part of our directive to the the administrators receiving direction, was you guys need to listen to this podcast so you understand this, so that Carlo doesn't have to meet with everyone individually mm-hmm. and then discuss all the 515s. So that's where, again, we're taking an issue to a 1 year to a 3 month to a 1 month to a 1 week to a day, and that's basically how you use that targeted plan section. Right now we just have it super basic. This is the second 515 that Rachel's put together that we kind of just briefly prioritized, but it's only 6 things long. I think there's 2 sub bullets total, mm-hmm. but it's like, oh, this is gonna explode. Yeah. There's a lot of different pieces to this, and then what happens is in the next week on Sunday, it's just make a new copy of this 515, just copy and paste, put a new date on it, and then boom, what did you get done last week of your subcategories or your mm-hmm. your sub targets, I guess would be one way of putting it. The within that targeted plan, you can go from 6 bullet points to 8 pages or whatever in between, right? Yep. The reason that you do that and you remain flexible on it is because the administrator providing direction provides enough direction to obtain success. Yes. That can be really, really uncomfortable for a lot of people. Yeah. And I think that you and I especially struggle with that
on a day-to-day basis because again, we think A, B, C, D,
yes,
or one level below it, and it's just like, well, I'm just gonna go do it,
right,
and that thought process, and then us slowing down to say, no, I need to give this person 4 levels deep, and then the list of 5 things within that, so that they can succeed.
Correct.
Or at a minimum saying, okay, you need to get me, like you need to work to get to that process, and then we're going to review your thought process and make sure that it's in alignment with what I think is going to actually happen, right?
Yeah.
Like not necessarily that you have to spoon feed it, but give the amount of direction that's necessary, whether it's the individual that's performing the task or the administrator providing the instruction and ultimately to perform that task. Just get to the point where you both know what success looks like.
Right.
That's really all it comes down to.
Yeah.
And then from that, go what is standing in your way. So the more clear that you are, the more that you share the picture of where are we going, it's also a lot easier to share what the picture of the road looks like.
Yep. And this again merges with what is the performance growth plan.
Right.
So in that challenges section, which now from accomplishments to targeted plan to challenges, you can actually pull from the growth plan, and you can actually put the low marker growth plan items from the whatever it's the verbal review or the written review, and just throw them in there. And you just say, okay, these are things that we identified. So the challenges in of themselves, if you look at what the traction model is on your issues to your 1 year to your quarter to then getting down, the challenge is basically just another issues list.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
So it's you pull issues from anywhere. Like I said, there's kind of those 2 main categories that we kind of said before. But you can pull challenges from the growth plan as well, I guess is the 3rd potential category. On just saying these have been barriers for you, or at least what we assume to be barriers in the last year. Are these continuing to be challenges? Are these continuing to be barriers for you? Is it because we, like you said, we don't have clarity in the actual plan items, so we don't actually know how to accomplish those. So that's 1. 2 is someone just keeps giving you more work outside of the scope of what we have given direction for or discussed. And then again, the 3rd being is it's just these are actual innate barriers to either your skill set, your mindset. And I think, like you had said just a moment ago, just to relate it back to our TriCore discussion or our TriCore podcast, and I said we kind of cruised over it, was the systems thinkers and then the practical thinkers. So system thinkers is I can just take 1 through 6 and do it. The practical thinkers are I'm going to need it broken down 15 different ways. And I think, like you said, we have a hard time slowing down. That is a point of conflict.
Absolutely.
When you have an administrator who's giving direction, thinking in 1 through 6, and you have an administrator receiving direction who thinks in 1A, 1B, all the way down into the finer points. I think at one of our growth plan clarity meetings we had last week, I think I pretty much said the 515 is here to just fuck shit up. It's pretty much here to just break everything. Yeah. Now again, don't get me wrong, it's here for us to accomplishments and target, our targeted plan and challenges and so on and so forth. But this is, again, it's a metric of accountability. It's saying, let's just sort of go through this and figure out where if we aren't clear on our challenges. So the first one, challenges, we're not clear on why you can't get this task done. 2, we're not clear on why people keep giving you extra work. 3, we're not clear on what these long-term challenges have actually been. Let's just try to break that system. It's the joke that we made, or I make all the time, is I make rules with the intent of breaking them. It's like, let's just use this as a tool to really not stress you out on an emotional level, but just stress the system. Try to figure out, because again, if we're the administrators giving direction and we're off mark, and we don't, and now again, not off mark from a culture, core value, or education standpoint, but if we're off mark as far as how we think this task should be completed, meaning we think as target plan number 1, the accounts receivable macro text drafts for our communication guide, we think we know how that is going to go. But like you said, for us, we're just going to jump in there and start doing it as a systems thinker. But a practical thinker is going to be like, well, okay, how can I learn on where I can actually go to just try to test this thing out? So it's giving latitude in what that targeted plan is. But the idea is you stress everything to try to find out what are you accomplishing, what aren't you accomplishing, what is your targeted plan, and are we on plan to relate back to what our quarter priority and our 1 year initiative is, so we can continue to knock off more issues.
It also allows the individual that is receiving direction the opportunity to fail comfortably.
Sure. Yes.
So when we had that meeting, that was what I heard, right? Was like, just go, just start doing stuff. Like,
yes.
If it breaks, we're going to catch it right away.
Correct.
Like if we screw it up, we know that we can fix it.
Yes.
But if we don't move, we don't know what's broken.
Correct.
Therefore, we can't move.
Correct.
So you just have to go try something.
Yes. And I think that was one of the big points was, I don't want to stop doing something that's working.
Yes.
That's, I think, when we start talking about stressing the system, it's like, well, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I don't know if you don't like the way that I'm doing that. It's just like you said, we'll figure it out.
Right.
We'll catch it, and it's like, as soon as that happens, it'll just be an opportunity for then, boom, here's, okay, nope, not that way, this way. Oh, okay, sounds good.
And that's, again, why that goes back to that dance between culture and actual implementation of a process like this. Because if you have a junk culture,
yes,
it's really, really hard to be comfortable to fail.
Yes.
So like if you have the belief, whether it's conscious, subconscious, whatever, that your head's going to get cut off if you fail, this process is really kind of arbitrary and just like it's going to be so tentative, and it's going to be so just walking on eggshells, that your progress is going to be minimal, if not non-existent, and also very slow.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have the culture that can stomach failure,
yes,
and say, awesome, thanks for showing us where this doesn't work.
Yes.
Now let's get better. Then it's like, oh, sweet, I can kind of just run. And if I run into a wall, like, I'm already wearing a helmet.
Right.
Like, right.
We give you that as part of your starter bag.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you just keep going. You keep finding the obstacles, keep falling down, and just keep getting back up. It's fail forward.
Exactly.
It's a mechanism to allow you to do that.
Yeah.
Again, works back and forth. If you've got broken culture, this is going to help you identify where you have limitations culturally. And when you have good culture, you're going to find limitations on process and just everything that you're doing. Yeah. It works back and forth. So I think that's it's really an item if you have, especially in the instance that you have individuals that you do not see on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
Like physically
see.
Yeah. You really need to have something like this in place, because it's really, really easy to get out of alignment on what's happening.
I was going to say, get off track. Yeah.
It's not even necessarily that you disagree on what should be happening when, all that sort of stuff, but like, if you have issues and you're not visibly seeing them or whatever it might be, it's really easy to fall into the assumption that individual is being lazy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like you said, if you're not in alignment. Yeah. And actually, I want to bring this back again to our performance and potential grid that we talked about a couple casts ago. Was I think like you said, you'll sort out if you don't have good culture. But I think the other side too is is this person lazy? Are they not? But I think it then comes back to like, how is this actual person fitting within that culture? So maybe it's not a scenario where you as a clinic have shit culture, but it's like what happens if you have good culture but this individual isn't aligning? And bringing it back to the performance potential grid is where we had an individual that was a problem child, which is low performance, high potential. They kind of started to just barely touch up into that star player category, where their performance was actually pretty decent, and their potential was kind of met right up with that, where they were just starting to drive forward, and then they rapidly moved back to the backbone, where it was like performance was still decent, but there really wasn't any potential. We weren't going anywhere, but it was an administrative position receiving direction that we really needed high potential. We really needed someone to continue to move these things forward because we needed the process to work. So that's the loop we want to stop people from going, is high, from problem child to star player to backbone. You want to catch them before they get down into the iceberg. It's the counterclockwise movement of the performance potential grid. The counterclockwise movement is saying that you want to try to catch them before they drop into the iceberg category. Well, that was actually the very first time we had implemented the 515, was we were starting to fall back into to that low potential. We were starting to drop off on performance. We were starting to bridge that gap between high performance, low performance. So it was from backbone to iceberg. And it was like, hey, let's do this 515. It's going to give us the opportunity to help you prioritize your tasks and saying, okay, you are receiving administrative direction on, say, 10 different things. Maybe you're just getting overwhelmed with those individual items where it's like, you know, you have 3 huge categories, this job, this job, this job, or this role, this role, this role. And you are having just the clarity part. And again, this is the communication, right? This person is lazy. They're not getting their job done. However, maybe it's that they aren't actually clear on what they need to be doing first. So when we started to issue out at least the 515, and then Annie, I believe, was meeting with this individual receiving direction for, it was a week. Every week, I'm sorry, not meeting for a week, but they were meeting once a week, weekly. Yes, there we go. Thank you. There's the word I was looking for. And it wasn't the parachute. It wasn't the net in which we could catch this individual, because her own individual accountability and her own perspective on receiving direction was starting to fall off. So it was a circumstance where it was like, crap, we have this person who's starting to drop performance. We just want to give them direction so that they succeed in saying, hey, and this is coming back to the challenges and so on and so forth. If a challenge is that this one role is too much and you don't want to do that role anymore, just tell us you don't want to do that role anymore.
Right.
I don't care. Our administrative team doesn't care if you don't want to do that role anymore. We just don't want you to continue to fail at this role. We want to focus you into these other 2 roles or this other 1 role where you're going to kick the hell out of that. Awesome. Some people get overwhelmed. Some people get tired. Some people just lose interest. Perfectly acceptable. Shift the responsibility back to the administration team giving direction, and we'll find someone else.
Right.
There's no problem with that.
Right.
However, the perception is then they're meeting with me every week to tell me all the stuff that I'm not getting done, and they're going to take one of my jobs away. That's exactly not how this tool should be perceived, because then that is coming from a what? It's an unaccountable person who is starting to play the victim role, right? So if you start to see where you're moving through the 515s, we're trying to implement culture in the clinic, we're trying to do tasks on whatever happens to be AR to marketing to doesn't matter, to anything. And you start to have where you're trying to work through these 515s and it's met with just that resistance of, why do you keep telling me the stuff I'm not doing? Well, actually, technically, category 1 is all the stuff you did get done. So let's understand that accomplishments is a part of what this process is. But that's where, when you start to say I have crap culture, is that maybe you are actually starting to identify the crap, and trying to identify these individuals that now on a week-to-week basis, you're just not giving up. And I think that's where we talk about the loss of unaccountable employees and saying, we as an administration team, we don't give up. We never stop. And part of it is, we've said before, is the addiction of the problem solver. For us, if we have a problem that we do not yet have a solution for, we're going to keep pushing because we want to find the solution, because finding solutions to problems feels really, really good. But it can also appear as if we're nagging constantly.
Yeah, there's that. I may be really good at that.
Yeah. But it's not. If we're here as, again, our biggest drive, our biggest intent of this company is to serve the patient. And for us, I mean, that is the writing we have taken off of the wall, is saying that is what we are here for. It's like, it feels so good when you start to have these massive challenges and you finally crack the nut. It's like, oh my God, I want to do that again. That's basically what we're trying to instill over into the administrators receiving direction, or the individuals receiving direction, is like, hey, let's find some stuff and sort of break it a little bit, because then we find those problems, we're going to find a solution. It's going to feel really good. And then you're going to be hooked. I mean, that's only what it boils down to, is if you can hook someone into problem solving, just like when it comes with kids, if you can hook them onto learning, you'll never have to teach them. It's the same thing. If you can hook them onto the solution of problem solving, meaning just how good it feels to be in the high level of that accountability ladder, it's freaking addicting.
And we're gonna go super, super wide scope for a moment, so I apologize.
That's fine.
But where we kind of started this conversation, and we've talked about it a few times, is that idea of having alignment across the board, right? Is when I'm gonna go back like a little bit. That is the thing that happens when a millennial goes from crap performance to high performance. And we talked about the idea of being able to have local influence. Like, that's what and it's going to become more and more of a thing as the workforce turns over, is those individuals want to be able to make an impact.
Absolutely.
Impact can only happen within your scope of influence.
Yes.
So have a mechanism where that individual can understand their scope of influence and make a difference in it.
Absolutely.
This is how you do it. And
Yes.
then when you do that, and then you figure out, number one, if they're accountable or unaccountable,
Yep.
let's just assume that they're unaccountable, because generally speaking, that's a tougher mindset to just naturally have.
Sure. Yes.
Is you can teach them how to be that way. You can give them the opportunity for success as well as the opportunity for comfortable failure.
Yes.
And then the tools in which to improve.
Yes.
And make a bigger impact on their scope of influence.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden, they're addicted to it.
Yes.
That's the thing that's like, oh shit, they just went from like real slow to 10 times faster in a moment's notice.
Yep.
This is how you do that.
Yep.
And again, like in terms of what older generations used to have, I don't know if that was as big of an influence, but again, going back to one of the very first things that we said, technology is an accelerator.
Yes.
Because what people are seeing on the internet are people that are obtaining this big level of success within their scope of influence and watching it increase dramatically in a short amount of time.
Yes.
And they want that. They want to be able to make a difference.
Yep.
They want to show up to work and enjoy the hell out of it so it doesn't feel like work.
Right.
Right? Well, how do you do that? Make a difference.
Yep.
Serve something.
Yes.
Serve whatever it is that you're doing. And this is where it gets outside of just veterinary world. But
absolutely.
for us, serve the patient is ultimately why we're here. Is like this is the mechanism to start that process forward. So if you have significant performance issues, you have to provide the framework for these people to succeed because they want to make a difference. As much as you might not believe it, you might think that they're lazy and they just don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to make a difference.
Absolutely.
They, even if they don't know it yet.
Yes. Yes. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting goosebumps. Like
that was Ben just like bringing it all kind of together, which but this is how that happens. And that's why there's so much value in this tool because then you get down to the last thing, right? Is your connections, which in our performance growth plan, we also refer to as resources.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So either way, you all help these people identify what is out there for you to help you succeed on this front.
Yes.
You know, one of our doctors is like, he has issues in communication, right? So then there's Ben over here who really like knows communication pretty dang well.
Right.
Our paths don't really cross all that often, but in his growth plan, I'm on it.
Yes.
Because hey, here's this problem. Here's this individual as a resource and a connection that you can use within your growth plan. When are we going to do that? Because we got some other stuff that's on your targeted plan.
Yep.
Where is this in the priority order? How do we continue to get you to succeed? How do we continue to feed you're not feeding motivation, you're feeding the buy-in to the process, because motivation is fleeting, but process is really forever. Once it's a part of the way that you behave, I don't need to motivate you anymore. You're already motivated.
Yes.
So that's really what that comes down to is provide the framework, provide the resources, provide the ability to fail comfortably so that you can, again, that's going to be that the failure of comfortably typically is when I go outside of my scope of influence too. I thought too big. I tried to impact something that ultimately I wasn't able to do, or I simply sat on my hands and didn't do anything.
Right.
But typically that's not the issue.
No.
So you get outside of that scope, it's like, all right, we want to get there at some point, but let's reel it back in. Let's continue to get our room in order here so that we can get there. Yep. And once you have that, you're not going to stop.
No,
because
you can't at that point. It's like I said, and that's where I to even build on that. Like, we bought the clinic August 28th of 2015, right? So this is a specific date. I stopped working the 28th. Of that year.
Yes.
Like it was that final kickoff for me where I was like, holy crap. I'm like, again, because I have the addiction of a problem solver. Yep. So for me, it stopped becoming a job. And I'm not necessarily saying like you have to buy a practice or you have to be at that level of ownership. It's what we often refer to as quote unquote buy in. Yes. Right. So you just have to buy into the idea, the mindset, the process, in that regard. But that's, that level of fulfillment, I think for me, when just a moment ago, you started talking about like this being a tool. I mean, that's exactly what we talk about all the time. We go through our accountability ladder. We just want people in number 6 and 5, which is own it and reality. Just be in the own it category. We have a ton of solutions. We have a ton of tools for implementation. This is what we're talking about. And you're exactly right to pull it all together and saying like, we have these metrics, we have these tools. Maybe now they're a bit more in writing. Before they were more kind of theoretical, philosophical, more in conversation. But to have the tools sort of in hand to provide, like, that's why, like I said, I got goosebumps. Like for me, like that's my addiction. I'm like, oh my God, I get to, because for me, I've stepped outside of myself, like we said before, out of myself, out of the exam room, out of the business, out of the community, into the industry. Like I keep getting goosebumps. I'm like, oh my God, think about how many people we can actually help.
Yeah.
Think about when we start to help more people, whether it be veterinarians, veterinary nurses, or the support staff, we start to help more clinics, we start to help more caregivers, we start to help more patients, our ability to actually help more animals on, serving the patient, to help more animals on like the state, regional, and, whatever it ends up going to be. God, that's amazing. That is amazing.
Right.
And I'm happy to be a part of that process. But you're exactly right. This is a tool that really gets it down to the day-to-day.
Right.
But you have to have both, an administration who can see the large picture, yet to break it down into consumable items, to break it down into, like we said, weekly components, to then be able to issue that direction between a systems thinker and a practical thinker to make sure I'm aligning that way, and then just mess it up. Then just, try to, figure out where both sides are going to have things that they accomplish. Both sides are going to have things that they fail at. And it's part of the, like you said, this comfortable failure, this ability for administration to fail and for the individual to fail. But in the end, we're still serving the same cause. We still have the same tools. We have the same purpose, and we're still seeking fulfillment as we go through the process of advancement.
Right. So I'm going to go all the way back to episode 1.
Nice.
In that episode, what we talked about a lot was individual autonomy.
Yes.
Having people in your clinic who can be autonomous in their behavior is a massive step towards obtaining success. So you have that, and then you have all the way on the other side would be like national, potentially global influence, right?
Sure.
Being the force of change within the veterinary profession.
Yes.
There's a enormous gap
Yeah.
between those two things, right? Because when you say force of change within the entire profession, understanding the scope of influence on that is just enormous.
Yes.
The idea of, okay, I have that, but now I want to have a structure that just focuses down to the individual.
Yes.
And allowing them the opportunity to be autonomous.
Absolutely.
This is it.
Yes.
You just go smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until you get to the person. And that's why that large corporate structure with wanting to make this difference doesn't freaking work.
No.
Because the large structure cannot look at it from a regional, national level and say, you one person, this is how you're going to feed that machine perfectly.
Yes.
It's not possible.
No.
It's just their scope's too big, and that's why we tell you to stay in the clouds. We need big scope,
yes,
but we also need small scope, and that's why we have Katie. That's why we have Andy. That's why we have a number of staff around to continue to feed the smaller scope, because we still want those people to make a difference in their scope of influence.
Yes,
and appreciate where they sit and also what's happening around them.
Absolutely. It's purpose and fulfillment. It's purpose and well-being.
Yes.
So
that's why we put so much weight on this tool. That's not at all where we thought this conversation was going to go.
Yeah.
I didn't. Thank you for just leading me to water so I could drink. But I think that, yes, did we really talk about implementing? Not a lot, but really it's trial and error, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
That's what traction was for us.
Yeah.
You have to figure out how to have these conversations on your own. I cannot provide you the words to do so.
Yeah. We can show you how to do it a few times.
Right.
Yeah.
But ultimately you're going to have to put the rubber on the road.
Yeah.
And then from there, you continue forward. You do that back and forth between culture and also process, and finding where your highest priorities are. And then for us, it took a lot of time, actually, not some time, but really to implement from the traction level and then get it down into the individual level.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't officially full-time here when that happened, but I know it took, from a traction level, to really get comfortable in that process, probably took about 6 months just for 4 people.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, truthfully, I really feel that looking at our education system and how we start out the first page of the education system to have the skills rubric, the interest list, and the 515, I think I'm glad that we focused so hard on education this year, because like we had said, tier 3 of the education system has always been there, and this is again just more and more tools of implementation to increase clarity, but also increase efficiency, reducing the occurrence of unnecessary conflict. But it's, I think honestly, if I was going to look at a veterinary clinic or veterinary owner or managerial structure trying to adopt, kind of this push the company to forward together, I definitely see how it could be intimidating. I mean, I think it's intimidating for all of us, but it's pretty much as we lay it out. You just have to have the direction to allow people to fail, essentially, and knowing that that's okay, but also that it's guided, it's by design. The failure is by design, that we're helping you get over a hurdle through a challenge, identifying new variables. And that's, again, coming back to the local influence. You have to have it. You have to have local influence. Yeah,
absolutely. So I could continue.
Yes.
However, it's been roughly about an hour. And we're going to put all sorts of links in the description for all of this stuff.
We'll get stuff up online, and actually, we'll get all of our resources up there. So.
Absolutely. So I hope that was at least relatively insightful into some of the stuff that we do, and understanding the why ultimately at the end of that. But
515s,
really, ultimately, give it a shot. Like, right? Isn't that the answer?
Yeah.
Just get out there and try something.
Get out there and do it. Yeah, in that way you can start to hyper manage your time in the clinic.
Exactly. So hey, we'll be back next week. Right. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.
Yep.